John, welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. My pleasure indeed. I've been trying to convince my two daughters. I did for quite a long time. They're now, well, one's in her early 30s, and the other one is 28, 29. I tried to convince both of them quite a long time that sales was a noble profession and they should follow in my footsteps. And I kind of failed, frankly. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your views about that as we trundle along.
Yeah.
But what is it you get paid to do now, John? Just for those of you, a lot of people will have heard of John Barrows sales training. Let's be honest, you've got an enormous number of great clients, fantastic pedigree and a great track record, and you've been doing it for a long time. But if you were to describe what is it you get paid to do now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I try to boil it. It's simple. I'm a sales trainer. I train sales reps how to sell, and ideally more effectively, and to help change that negative perception that your daughters might have had, right? I mean, I think that we're in this world where sales is looked at in such a negative light. But if done right, I think it's the greatest profession in the world, because it drives everything that we do. Every business that I know, there's no businesses that I know out there. I'll take that back. The majority of the businesses that I know that have failed, it's not because of product market fit. It's not because they don't have a good service, solution, people, any of that stuff. It's because they can't sell it. And so, showing sales reps how to sell the right way with ethics for the right reasons, and not try to be that sleazy, what everybody thinks of, is what I get paid to do.
How long have you been doing it for?
Oh man. So I've been officially, well, I'm 48 now. So I've been selling officially for 28 years. I've been doing this for about, specifically selling sales, working sales training, for about 14 years.
But you didn't originally set out to become a salesperson, did you?
No.
What did you think you would be doing when you were 16, John?
I had no idea. And that's the point. Like, that's what bothers me about universities these days, is I actually think higher education is a bit of a joke right now. Because to go, at least here in the States, I'll take that back. When you can get an education for, 10,000 euro or something like that, then go for it. By all means, go into college because it's a great social education. And I got no problem blowing $10,000 a year on a social education. But here in the States, when you're paying 40, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 a year, and you're going into $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year of debt to get a $40,000 a year job, I think is a joke. And so, with sales, it's one of those, for me, like, I never knew it was a profession, because back when I graduated in 98, it wasn't something that you could major in. And now you can, which I think is extremely beneficial. I mean, there's about 200 universities here in the United States that you can get your degree in sales in, but I didn't. So I got my degree in marketing, because, let's put it this way. My first major was art. And I realized very quickly I wasn't going to be able to make any money. Then I went to engineering because my dad was an engineer, and I failed. That was a hard no when I hit advanced calculus. Then I went into science because I thought biology was got kicked in the teeth, and I kind of settled on marketing. And again, I think it's absurd to ask a 16-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid what they want to be for the rest of their lives at a university. And so for me, I graduated, and when I started looking at the jobs of of marketing, none of them really appealed to me. They were all like doing this for a very specific period of time, being the assistant to the assistant to the assistant, and then getting, your promotion in 2 years when you get your 2.5% merit raise. And that just didn't, like, I had entrepreneurial genes, even though I didn't know it. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. They didn't call them back then, but they both worked out of the house, and they were both consultants in their own right. And so I always had my parents around the house working. My mom's office was our living room. My dad's office was his study. And so when I got into the real world and I got into this corporate structure where I realized no matter how hard I worked, it didn't matter. They fit me in a box, like something just didn't fit right with that. And so when I started to get into sales and realized, the harder I work, the more I get paid. This makes sense to me. I like this, right? And then when I realized what sales actually was versus what the movies tell us it is, I started to fall in love with the profession and eased my way through it. So,
where did you learn the fundamentals of selling for the first time, John?
I think when I was a kid, I sold a lot of stuff, right? And I understand supply and demand. I understand what people liked versus what I thought was cool. But I think where I really got my foundation, my first job out of school was DeWalt Power Tools. So it was under sales, but it really wasn't. It was more event marketing. And so my job was to drive around in a Dodge Ram pickup truck, giving away free tools to construction workers, which was pretty much the coolest.
It sounds like a lot of fun, was it?
Oh, it was a blast.
Yeah.
It was a blast. But the challenge with it was, and this is where I work. Look, I always knew I wasn't the smartest kid out there, but I always knew I had a strong work ethic, and we can get to that. Where I think work ethic is sorely lacking in today's world. People say you got to work smart. Like, shut up. You have to work smart and hard. Like, you got to work your ass off right now to be successful. There's not one successful person I know that hasn't worked their ass off to get to where they are, right? And so I knew that early age that and my dad, I always, earn it, and so I got into DeWalt, and as fun as it was, my boss came over from Asia. He was like 4 or 5 years older than us, and he wasn't from Asia, but he was American and loved that lifestyle. And so his whole mentality is work is work, work is play, go go go. So I was working like 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm not kidding. Like, I'd get a call from him at midnight saying, "John, you need to be up at XYZ, location by tomorrow at 7." I'd be like, that's a 6-hour drive. He'd be like, "Yep, better get in your truck right now." I'd be like, "Fuck, are you kidding?" So I remember like 9 months into this being like, I called my dad. I was like, "Dad, like, I know I got to put in my dues here, but I've been working 7 days a week, 16, 17 hours a day. I'm like, I think this seems a little extreme." And he's like, "Yeah, you're right. That's a little extreme." So then I started kind of looking around, and I got promoted to the Home Depot team, which is where that was a little bit more sales, because they had to buy DeWalt Power Tools, but I had to take a $10,000 order and turn it into a $50,000 order, right? Through relationships and cross sells and those type of things. But where I got my true sales education was when I left there after about a year and a half, and I worked for Xerox. That's where, and this was 1999 when Xerox was still one of the top training, like they had an 8-week sales training program. And not only did they have an 8-week sales training program, but I mean, I sold copiers to the government.
That's a tough job, isn't it?
It's about as commoditized of a product as you could possibly get in a government where you don't get to negotiate on contract. Like, once you're in, for those of you who don't know government contracts, once your price is on the government contract, that is your price. There's no discounts you can do. There's no extra special things. Like, that is your price. And at the time, Xerox was 30% premium over everybody else in the marketplace. So that's where I got my formal sales education.
How did you get on justifying that 30% premium?
So this is where I learned it didn't matter what you sold. It mattered that you believe in what you sold. I didn't care about copiers, but I fundamentally believed that Xerox was the best copier company in the business. And it was because at the time, I always say, like, apples to pseudo apples, you can justify a 30% premium. Because I'll get into some of that stuff. But once you get to like the 50% premium and it seems as apples to apples, that's where I think the threshold starts to break. It's like, at that point, John, you're just too expensive. But the 30% premium, I settled in on them. I can sell 30% premium because at the time, and these were just very kind of, I don't want to say feature function stuff, but Xerox was the only copier business that was single throat to choke, if you will. So they did all their own financing, they did all their own manufacturing, they did all their own everything, right? So customer service and everything. So whereas most of the other copiers in the space at that time, they outsourced their finance, they outsourced their manufacturing, they're mostly resellers that didn't do anything, right? So I was able, not only were they the best from a quality standpoint, but they had that single throat to choke go in there. But really where I learned how to sell it was actually out of force of, and this goes to learning lessons of different styles of sales. I learned this a little bit at DeWalt, but it really hit home, which was instead of the top-down approach, which most people they go right to the executive and then okay, cool. I was forced to do DeWalt I wasn't forced to, but I figured it out. Most of the other reps at DeWalt would go straight onto a job site, go straight to the trailer and find the foreman and be like, "Look at these great tools that we have. Our gears are better than their gears. Ours are metal," and all this stuff they taught us in product knowledge, right? And I wasn't that bright. So, and I loved construction sites. I loved DeWalt Power Tools. And so I put on my my steel toe boots and my hat, and I would walk into the construction, and I would sit there and see, Joey over there beating the crap out of a drill. And I'd be like, "Hey, Joey, you mind if I just kind of sit and watch how you kind of use that thing? Like, mind if I'll bring you lunch. You mind if I just ask you some questions about it? And by the way, have you ever used the DeWalt version of this? And do me a favor, could you use the DeWalt for the next week or so, beat the crap out of it? And can I come back in a week and tell you what you could tell me what the difference is? And so I spent like weeks on the job sites learning from and then once I felt like I really did have something, then I would go to the foreman and be like, hey, and since they had seen me on the job site multiple times, they're like, yeah, who are you anyways? I'd be like, well, I've been just chilling with your team, bringing them lunch, stuff like that. And I realized they're getting blisters here. And every time this one falls off the roof, they do this. And the DeWalt ones didn't. And they give me this feedback. And the foreman were like, excuse me? Like, I'd be like, oh, well, are you picking up a new pallet of drills next week? Yeah. Could you do me, but why don't you try the DeWalt ones this time versus, okay, yeah, no problem. And I started to really understand it wasn't about how much I knew about the product. It was the use cases. It was how the people saw it. So I took that to Xerox. When I was put in territory at Xerox, I was put into the government territory that had 6 reps in 3 years. 6 reps in 3 years. There was
through the same patch?
Through the same patch.
Yeah.
They had burned the territory to the ground because the reps just couldn't survive. And so when I would go in, where all my private sector reps would go in and flip copiers and start selling immediately, I tried to do that. And I would literally get kicked out of offices. Be like, all right, whatever. We're going to see another one of you in 6 months. Beat it, right? And I'm sitting there like, uh-oh. Like so I was then forced to go back to what I did at DeWalt. And so it was one building, it was one Ashburton Place in Boston, Massachusetts. I would walk into that building, start at the top floor and walk my way down and shake hands, kiss babies, shake hands, kiss babies. And what I realized was I started talking to the employees and I started mapping out their office and the click-through rates and whether they had analog or digital and how far they had to walk on certain things. And I didn't sell a damn thing. And I actually almost got fired. Right? Because my boss was like, oh, we brought you in. We thought you were some king shit here. Like, you haven't sold anything in 9 months. And I'm like, just give me time here. Like, I have to repair what you did. And so because I spent 9 months working, not selling anything, and the executives would see me in the office, then all of a sudden I put together these binders of click-through rates and how I could flip copiers from this to this and and help increase productivity and all these other things. And I would bring, hey, do you mind if I just get 10 minutes so I can walk you through some of the stuff I've learned about your business here and how I might be able to help achieve some of your better goals here? And they were like, yeah, sure, fine. And I started walking them through it. And then it was like, what? Wait, what? Like, this is what our click-through, this is how much time people are wasting on, oh my God. Like, yeah, let's do that. And that's where I was just like, okay, this design thinking approach to sales versus this top down, let me pitch you on how great our products are and our features are better than yours. It was like, this is obvious. This is the way that sales needs to be done.
So that was a light bulb moment for you.
It was when I got those big contracts and I was able to dump them on I did it a little bit more out of spite up front because I was getting so much crap from my boss about, I thought you were great. So I think after I dumped those contracts on his desk and, crushed my number year one, after I kind of took my ego out of it, I then started to realize, like, wait a minute, this is how sales should be done. It's not about convincing. I think people misconstrue this all the time, that sales isn't about convincing anybody of anything. If you are trying to convince someone in sales, I think you're doing it wrong. Sales is about helping people solve problems or achieve goals. That's it. And if your problems aren't big enough and your goals aren't big enough, why are we having this conversation? And that's, I think, where it realized was anybody could sell you a copier, right? But can somebody actually sell you something that's going to make a difference for your business? That's a different conversation.
And where was the inspiration, John, to start your own sales training business?
There was no inspiration. I'm not a risk taker. I'll take that back. I'm a calculated risk taker. I'll walk you through the progression after Xerox. I only lasted about a year and a half there because ask anybody who's ever been in copier sales how long they've been in copier sales, and there's a 2-year threshold in copier sales reps. You're either in and out in less than 2 years, or you're in it for the rest of your life. So I got in and out in 2 years. And then and the reason I got out was because my buddy, I told you I had that entrepreneur DNA. Mm-hmm. Even with sales, I still felt like at Xerox, I was in a box because I was told no matter how good I was doing, well, you got to spend 2 years doing this, then 2 years doing that, then 2 years. And I wanted, like, I looked up to like the third position ahead of me. I'm like, I want that role. Like, how fast can I get there? well, you get 2 years doing this. And I'm like, wait a minute. So that guy over there who's average, and you tell me, boss, we go out to lunch and you make fun of that kid, he's going to get the same promotion, a potential promotion as I am at the same time? That doesn't make any sense to me. And then I started to realize Xerox, again, no matter how hard I work, I was going to move Xerox's stock price. You know what I mean? And somebody else was going to come in behind me and maybe not be as good, but be okay. So startups, but I'm not a startup guy, like live in mom's basement, eat ramen noodles type of thing. My friend who I grew up with in high school, though, was that guy. And he had started an IT services company. And it was self-funded, and he had partnered up with another friend of mine who was probably the smartest kid I've ever met in school. You know, turned down Harvard, went to Duke, graduated magna cum laude from Duke, that type of thing. And they had built something. It was an outsourced IT services firm that did outsourced IT services for the SMB market. And they needed somebody to run sales. So I was like, hey guys, you know, pay me a base salary at least, right? That type of thing. But when I jumped into that, it was like I could breathe. Because as stressful as it was, because we had no money, no budget for anything, we weren't VC backed, as stressful as it was, I saw a direct line of impact of what I did. So every deal I brought in made a difference for the business. And as soon as I got a taste of that, I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so we ran that for about 7 years. I took, by the way, I was 24 years old, so I had no idea what I was doing. So I took every training I could. I took Sandler, Miller, Hyman, Taz, Spin, you name it, I was taking it. And I came across this group called Basho. And it was this first training that I took that I loved because it was very tactical. And so I used Basho to help grow Thrive. We ended up being the fastest growing company in Massachusetts for about 4 years in a row. Got us to about 85 employees and about 12 million in revenue. And then we sold to Staples. So Staples came and bought us. And I spent about a year going through that transition, and come to find out, apparently I'm not a corporate guy. I don't have any filter at all, and I really don't like playing politics. So after a little while, Staples offered me another position. They fired me. And I was looking for, and this is where I had a little bit of a heart attack, right? Because I got fired. I had never been fired before in my life. You know, I was a top performer at every single company that I was working at. And I had been heads down with IT services for 7 years, heads down. So I had no plan B. And so when I was looking for a job, I was like, oh my God, like, what, am I an IT sales guy? Is that what I am? Like, I don't even like computers. And my wife, thankfully, was the one who helped me figure this out. She's like, well, let's take a look back at your career. And she's like, let's find out, why were you the best sales rep in each one of your previous roles? She's like, let's start with DeWalt. Why were you the best sales rep in the region for DeWalt? I'm like, I don't know, because DeWalt power tools are pretty cool. Like, they weren't hard for me to sell. Like, they're badass tools, right? Xerox. Why were you the best sales rep at Xerox? And so it's not because I love copiers, because I believed that genuinely that Xerox was the best in the copier business. Why was Thrive Networks the fastest growing company? It wasn't because of the computers. It was, I believed in the people. I believed in the service. So it dawned on me that it didn't matter what I sold. It mattered that I believed in what I sold. And so that opened up my eyes to a whole bunch of other opportunities. And then a recruiter friend of mine who I had sat down with for lunch said, yeah, I was like, hey, what's out there? What should I be looking at? I've been totally blind for 7 years. She goes, have you looked at Basho? And it was the sales training. I had actually introduced her to it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no. I was like, I don't want to be a sales trainer. She's like, why not? And because my mentality, every sales trainers I had had up until that point, we've all been there. We're either failed sales professionals or professional presenters. Mm-hmm. Right? If you can't do it, teach it, right? Mm. And so I didn't want to be that guy. And and she said, John, just go see what they're doing. And I interviewed, and they had a model where you had to sell to train. So you couldn't just be a trainer. You had to sell the training to then train it, which I liked, right? Because I had the whole practice what you preach thing. So I was like, all right, I could see this. Let me jump on board here. And this was also, I had always had the itch to go off on my own, but I was way too scared to do it. And I didn't believe in myself enough especially from not myself. I didn't believe in my content. And I'm like, who the hell would pay for, what I built over here to help these companies grow? I'm like, I did that out of necessity, not out of, so I didn't have that lot of confidence. So I joined Basho to learn. And then I ended up taking over some of the bigger accounts, dropping, bringing on some bigger ones. And to make a very long story short, they screwed it up and I took it over. So back in 2008, 2009, new CEO came in when the economy was tanking, fired us all on the spot, like literally fired us on the spot, walked in and he said, all right, here's a check, here's your box, get out, and left the training on the side of the road to die. And again, even still, I probably should have jumped onto that myself, but I was still scared. So I went with two of the other senior trainers and we took that part of the business and ran with it. And then about 4 years after that, I ended up going off on my own because then I finally had the confidence and the kind of the experience to feel like I can do this.
And it's been about 15 years then that you've been running your own business?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, give or take. I'd say probably 2010. Yeah, 2010 I think is when I went off on my own officially.
Yeah. 14 years. A long time. You picked up some great accounts in that time, didn't you? How did you manage to get into the likes of Salesforce and LinkedIn and all these great tech companies?
Well, this goes to a learning lesson for startups is when we were transitioning from Basho. So when the guy fired us all, right? It was me and the other two senior trainers. And Basho had some insane clients on their list, like Gartner, SAP, Forrester, Salesforce. And by the way, we had used, that was the reason I love the training content, because we actually used the content to get those type of clients. Okay?
You walked the talk, you really did.
Absolutely. Like I got into HP by sending an email to Mark Hurd and getting response back from Mark Hurd. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Fantastic. I still have the email. We got into Salesforce by not going after Mark Benioff, but by going at George Hugh and Frank Vander. I always forget how to pronounce his last name, but the CMO and the CSO of Salesforce, right? So we got referred down. And then back then it was a different strategy. But I remember me and the other two trainers, like we were just the three guys left. Let's put it that way. We didn't choose to be in business together. And I mean, this guy had just left a $3,000 business on this, a $3 million business on the side of the road to die with an insane client list, a revenue stream that was already there, and a product that everybody loved. Like, so very few people get to start a business like that.
Yeah.
So I was like, and I was the one while everybody was like zombie land, like, whoa, I just lost a job. I gotta, again, this goes back to my mentality in the sense that I'm not a risk taker. I'm a calculated risk taker, and I'm also an opportunist. I think one of my skills is I don't overanalyze. I can usually put 1 or 2 or 3 data points together and say, yep, that makes sense. Let's go. And I don't overanalyze. And so while everybody else was walking around like a zombie, I walked into the CEO's office and said, hey, that sucks. What are you going to do with the training? And he looked at me, no joke. He looked at me, he was like, because he went all in on the software. What he had done was just kept the technology that they were working on and dumped everything else. He didn't have a good answer for what it was. He's like, I don't know. What do you think I should do with it? I was like, what? I was like, you don't know. I was like, effectively, can I have it? And he was like, well, yeah, go put together a plan. So I brought everybody back to my house and I was like, guys, who's coming with me? 2 of them stayed. So then the strategy was we sat in the office and we put all the logos up on the whiteboard. And I knew I only wanted one account, and it was Salesforce. Now, mind you, this was 2010 when Salesforce was Salesforce, but they weren't Salesforce. But they were on their way up. Where all the other ones, and this also fit my mentality too, like all the other ones, SAP and Gartner, these were all, they felt like old, stodgy, they didn't fit my style. And Salesforce was this like SaaS, like what the hell is this? Chaos, go, go, go. So I just inherently liked them better working with them, even though I had worked at I'd trained SAP and all these. So I pretended to care about all those other logos because I've been in SAP, like that should be my account, right? And I knew for a fact that the only one I wanted was Salesforce. And when I got Salesforce, and this goes to entrepreneurs, know your ideal customer profile and know it well. And only do business with your ideal customer profile. Don't stretch it. The thing I see most entrepreneurs do is they go do stuff that's outside of their skill set. Even companies, revenue's revenue, right? Let me go get revenue. Anybody will pay. No, revenue is not revenue. There is bad revenue. There are customers that will suck the life out of you because they think, because they know you need them, right? And so for me, I was like, nope. SaaS, tech, on fire. Even the economy was tanking. I knew it was going to rebound eventually. And so I got Salesforce. And then I over-serviced the hell out of them. Because I fundamentally knew that if I could get Salesforce as my number one client, the rest of the SaaS and the tech industry would be like shooting fish in a barrel. And that's exactly what happened. So I'd go
Wow.
to Singapore for a day. I'd go to Australia for a day. I'd go to India, Dubai, Dubai, all these places for one day. You know what I mean? I would give them discounts that I would give nobody else. And the whole goal there was to service them to the point where they were like, holy shit. And then everybody else, my pitch for a long time was, John, what do you do? My answer was, I train Salesforce how to sell. And that's an immediate like, excuse me? That rocket ship that's been growing 200% year over year, you're the one that's training them. And that wasn't even me just pretending like, oh, I'm just part of this equation. There was only two vendors, the outside vendors that taught Salesforce for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. It was me and Sandler. I showed the reps how to get the meetings. Sandler took it from there. And so I genuinely taught every single sales rep who went through Salesforce and got hired 1,000 reps a year. Every one of them took my training for 8 years.
Wow. That's a fantastic achievement. You must be very proud of that.
It put me in a position where I was able to build the reputation that I have. But it wasn't because I was, by the way, as a sidebar, it was not because I was a great major account seller. I was not, as a matter of fact. I suck at enterprise selling. I'm a mid-market guy. I'm much better at mid-market sales because that's what I'm comfortable with. And it was purely going back to work ethic. You can ask people in this industry, and they're like, they'll tell you that there was very few people that could have done what I did, but it wasn't because I was that good. It was because I was willing to bleed.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah. Well, and it worked, and you built not quite, a very successful business. How did you get on through the recent downturn? Did that impact your business at all? I'm kind of thinking all the layoffs that some of these big tech companies, in fact, nearly all of them had, didn't they?
Yep.
A year or so back. How did that impact a business that was largely focused on SaaS vendors, I guess?
Destroyed me.
Did it really?
100%. Yep. Brought me back down to zero.
Wow.
100%. Yep. I had grown this business up to 20 employees and about 6 million in revenues. Everything was going great. And we were caught in the same wave that everybody else was, up and to the right, everything. And I realized I built a business because I could, not because I wanted to.
Oh, okay. There's a very big difference between those two.
There's a massive
things.
difference.
So you sort of lost touch with your North Star, if you like.
I didn't lose touch with it. I'm also a strength of a weakness of mine is attention to detail and accountability. And when you're not paying attention to the details and you're not holding other people accountable, you can't build a business. Well, you can't build a business other than yourself, because you can hold yourself accountable, but holding other people. And so what happened was I saw in 2000, like I had 4 trainers who worked for me full time, and I had a whole separate division called Sell Better that was running this daily show with sponsorships and everything else. And that part of the business I had no involvement in at all, because I had let my business partner create that, and it was doing well. I mean, we were getting crazy contracts from some of the biggest names in the industry, and it was cranking, right? But then at the end of 2022, I started to notice a little bit of a slowdown, and I was like, okay, all right, we're all right. We might not hit our year target, like whatever. Let's start prepping for Q1 of 2023. And then Q1 of 2023 happens, and it was a slaughter. And when I say a slaughter, I think I had 11 employees in 2020 when COVID hit. And that was mind you, 95% of my revenue up until that point was on site, flying around the world doing training.
Yeah.
So I saw
prior
90.
to COVID.
Yeah. Pre-COVID. Yeah. When COVID hit, that went to zero. 95% of my revenue went to zero in 2 months. And it was a panic, but our burn was relatively low. We were nimble enough, and we had been delivering remote training for a while. So nobody wanted it, though. Everybody wanted the on-site. And so we pivoted, and we were in the right place at the right time when things started to kick back into gear. And the SaaS industry itself exploded 3 months after COVID. I mean, exploded. And we were there for that ride. And so everything was great. So I figured I could kind of do the same thing here. Wrong. My burn was twice as big, and I wasn't nearly as nimble. And this was different than COVID. This was different. Like, money stopped. Because like I remember January is like, what the hell happened here? Then SVB happened, and Silicon Valley Bank. All my 95% of my clients are in SaaS.
Yeah.
So all of my clients had their money in SVB. And so just as you started to get a little bit of momentum, punch right in the gut again. And when I tell you it went to zero, it went to zero. And so what I had to do was I was looking for money to see if I could get some funding to try to keep this whole thing going again. But I realized I wasn't going to be able to get us all through this. I was going to have to sell my way through this because nobody was giving money at that point either.
So you had to get back to basics yourself.
Yeah. Well, I had never stopped selling. I always sold because I don't believe you can train this stuff without being in the mix, right? But I hadn't like hardcore sold in a long time.
No.
Like when I say hardcore selling, I mean like the emails and the calls and the and the LinkedIn and networking and all that other stuff. The
business development stuff, perhaps. Not so much. Yeah.
And for me, I said, well, how do I instill urgency without panic to my team? And I'm more of a lead by example guy than like, let me coach you on stuff guy. And so I took my CEO hat, threw it away, and I put my sales hat and went to work and ended up getting, I think I got like 49 meetings. You can back and look on this on LinkedIn. If you go back to February of last year, you'll see it. I got 49 meetings in February and 70 meetings in Q1. And a lot, yes, it was because of my brand, but I built it that way to leverage it when I needed to. But it wasn't because I was the smartest kid. It wasn't because I was the smartest. It was because I put in the work.
Yep.
Right. And when you looked at all the metrics, is like the activity levels, like the bar on mine was back to being by far the top.
Well, so John, let's explore that a bit, because it's something that what you've touched on here is you need to work smart and you need to work hard these days. Right.
Yeah.
And then, otherwise, I think what's going to happen is your job's probably going to get eaten by AI as a salesperson, isn't it? How do you think that's going to pan out? What does the future look like for the successful seller in the tech space of the next few years?
Iron Man, Iron Woman. We're not going to get replaced by AI. We're going to get replaced by sales reps who know how to use AI.
Right.
And I always say to reps, augmentation, not automation. Look to AI to augment what you're doing, not automate. Gary Vaynerchuk here in the States, he's, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a little crazy, but he's cool. And I went to his office one time. He has this 4D session where you can go and sit down with all, 10, 15 other entrepreneurs and have his executives come in. They show you what they're doing. And then he does a Q&A. And back in 2017, I had seen this AI email that was written based on my method, by my approach, by the way. Some kids had created this. And this was back in 2017. And they sent it to me, and it was better and faster than I could have ever written, right? And I remember Gary, and I was like, Gary, I just saw this AI bot write an email better and faster than I ever could. Where does that leave us as human beings, right? And he said, don't worry about the tech. You're not going to beat the tech, but be the last mile.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me to this day, which is let it do all the heavy lifting. Let it do the research. Let it even write the blog or the email or whatever it is. But right before you hit send, make sure you humanize it.
Yeah.
Because until computers start buying from computers, like once computers start buying from computers, I think we're in some trouble. But as long as there's a human on the other end of that loan, there's got to be that human piece to it. And so
I completely agree with you. I had, like you, I spent a fair bit of time on LinkedIn. I had LinkedIn write a LinkedIn post for me. I gave it a couple of topics.
AI read it for you? Yeah.
AI, yeah. I looked at it. I thought it's actually astoundingly good. However, I could think of a dozen people that would have written exactly the same article. So what it didn't have a flavor of Kevin Thiele. There wasn't my overlay, my experience, my years of understanding, learning, failing, how to engage people, right? That was the bit that was missing. It was the sort of the Kevin Thiele secret sauce in there.
The way I put it, and I don't know how to explain it any different than this, is it just doesn't have a soul.
No, I think that's
the AI stuff just doesn't have a soul. And I can tell you, I know I get hundreds of emails a day. I promise you, I would have a 98% accuracy on which one's AI, which one's a general piece of shit marketing cadence, and which one's actually personalized. I put me to the test. If I came out anything less than 95%, I'd be shocked.
So what does this mean for sales training then? I'm fascinated by your approach on this. I saw a post today on LinkedIn from a friend of mine. Actually, I'll call him out, Andy White from Medic.
Okay, yeah. Medic's
and Andy said, I just had this bizarre conversation with a sales rep who said, I don't really need sales training. I've kind of done it already. Now, exactly. I can see your eyeballs roll back in your head. How much time and training should a chief revenue officer spend? How much money, time should they spend on having their sales team trained on a regular basis? What are your metrics? Have you got any thoughts around that?
I mean, obviously, it depends on the organization and what you sell and who you sell to. I think if you're not constantly upskilling, I think you're in trouble. But how that manifests itself, whether you have to pay for it or not, is the question. I actually recommend the majority of my organizations that I work with turn their sales orgs into a sales lab. Because Salesforce just came out last year with this report, and we've all heard this before, that only like 28% of a sales rep's time is actually spent selling, right? Like client-facing stuff. So the other stuff is all admin type things. Well, you know how engineers have like hackathons, right?
Yep.
They pick something, they kind of nerd out on it for a little while and figure it out. Well, I think we should do the same thing in sales. I think we should have sales hackathons. So every Friday from 2 to 4 o'clock, pick some aspect of the sales process, right? Whether it's preparing for meetings, writing emails, updating CRM, doing account planning, whatever those things are, right? Looking for contact information. Then from 2 to 4 o'clock on Friday, pick one and then break up into groups and say, all right, everybody, whoever can find a solution for that thing, whatever it is, wins the day.
Yep.
And so now you get the older generation working with the younger generation. You can even bring in engineers because they're prompt writers and those type of things, and you start to learn. So that's one as far as finding tools and therefore upskilling on technology. The other thing is picking aspects of the sales process to just improve on. So, or looking at like nuggets of information and seeing if we can implement them to see how they make an impact. So for instance, I talk about split testing all the time. A/B split test everything you do. Well, let's choose objection handling. What's an objection that we're getting crushed on right now? John, we're all set, or we don't have time for this, or we don't have the budget, whatever that number is. Like now, go into ChatGPT or go into Perplexity and saying, this is what we sell. Here's the objection that we commonly face. Give me 5 objection handling techniques and what to say to address that objection. Then pick one that we all kind of like, role play it a little bit, and then that week, when that objection comes up, everybody starts trying that, like uses that, and then just keeps a little back of napkin math. Like it worked, it didn't work, it worked, it didn't work, it worked, it didn't work. And then come at the end of the week and say, okay, everybody, we hit that objection 50 times and we got 20 positives and 30 negatives on it. That's actually a pretty good ratio there. Let's keep that one next week. So you can actually turn your company into a continuous learning environment without a dime. Now, the benefit of bringing in a trainer is there's structure to it. There's a process to follow. There's hopefully some tested benefits of their methodology or whatever it is. But I really discourage anybody from looking for a singular methodology, because there's not one methodology out there that is good across the board. We all have our own specialties. Sandler's really good at discovery, right? So is Jim Keenan with gap selling. Like they're fantastic on discovery. There's nobody out there better than me when it comes to prospecting. I'm sorry, you can put me up against anybody, and I promise you that my prospecting stuff will be better than everybody else's. But mid-market negotiations, my stuff's awesome. Enterprise, complex sales, I'm not that great, right? So maybe Miller Hyman for the enterprise sales stuff, maybe Spin for these type of things, right? And so I think if you look to have a structure that you can plug different pieces into, because right now, if you are not agile, you're losing.
Yeah.
Agility is the number one. That's why the number one keynote that I've delivered over the past 3 months here has been Age of the Agile Sales Org, which is you have to create agility, because what worked 6 months ago is just not working anymore right now. And so you have to be testing and trying and when it comes to messaging, when it comes to, you name it, you got to keep testing stuff. So I think you could spend a ton of money and go to a massive methodology and waste a ton of it, because the average VP of sales lasts, 14 months at this point, 16 months. So new VPs are going to come in and like their own methodology. So good luck with that one. I've seen companies waste countless millions of dollars implementing something that it just gets thrown out a month later, or a couple of years later. Or you start to put together, you get a kind of foundational one, spend a few bucks, get the structure right, then let it go, or go totally free and just start using your team to do this. There's so much information out there that's free right now. And ChatGPT, the $20 version, is the best sales coach you'll ever have, quite frankly.
Do you think there's still a sort of room for old school sales, that kind of relationship building stuff that we were talking about earlier in this podcast, all that research that you did to understand your customer just by being with them on site? I mean, do we actually get to be with customers on site now? Is it all just video delivery stuff like this?
I think that's where where it sits. I think that's where the value is us, the relationship side of the house. But it's just the difference of what relationship means these days. Relationship value used to be steak dinners, golf, those type of shit. People don't have time for that shit anymore. I
Sadly.
mean,
It was
I'll
good
take
fun
that
when we
back.
did it.
Yeah, exactly. No, and again, I'm being very general here with my overview of this. There's absolutely industries, and there's absolutely people that can still get away with their Rolodex and their 3 or 4 clients that they over service, and they know their kids, and they go to golfing with them every week. Like, there's absolutely but that portion is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Value is redefined at this point. We've all heard the statistic, by the time somebody comes to us, they're already 60 to 70% of the way through the sales process, blah, 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 right? Well, there's actually, have you read Jolt Effect recently by any chance?
Yeah. Matt Dixon was a guest on my podcast a little while back. Yeah, great guy. Wrote the Challenger Sale, didn't he, with Brent Adams?
Exactly. So Challenger Sale, great. Challenger Customer, better. Jolt Effect was my favorite of the 3. And the whole thing with Jolt Effect is, and this is my takeaway from it. Everybody says no decision is our biggest competitor, and their positioning is it's not no decision, it's indecision. And it's because there's too many options out there right now. Things are moving too fast. There's too much risk, so people are afraid to make a decision.
Yes,
and
information overload as well. There's just
my point,
ton of information that people have now.
Challenger Sales says 60 to 70% by the time they get there. So the prevailing wisdom on that is, well, the client has all the info and we're playing catch up, and which was true. But now there's so much information that it's analysis paralysis, information overload, and they don't know what to do with themselves. So now it's actually the power's back on our end, but we have to change the way we saw value. Our value is helping them distill all that information, whether it's in our benefit or not, quite frankly, and helping them de-risk this decision. Because even if your situation, even if what I'm selling you is way better than what your current situation is, if the perceived risk of that transition is high, it doesn't matter. There's more people saying, John, I agree with you. Yours, like the reps that I work with, they literally have this conversation. Sarah, we agree with you. Your solution is 10 times better than what we're currently doing now, and we're still not going to do it. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Why would you're saying it's 10 times better than what you're doing right now, but you're still not going to do it? Why not? Well, because it's too risky. It doesn't align with our priorities. It's like, it's not top of mind for us right now. It's set it like we're devil we know right now is okay. Because again, nobody got fired for not making a decision. People get fired for making bad decisions.
Yep.
And so
there's a lot more people involved in making those decisions as well now.
Oh, which is that's Challenger Customer. That's Challenger Customer. Completely. That's the whole theory. That's where they.
I agree with you, by the way. I do agree with you. I interviewed Brent Adamson as well recently, and I said to him, I thought the Challenger Customer is actually a better book even than the Challenger Sale. But Jolt moves things along. We need to move this conversation along because we're going to run out of time. Yeah. I've got one great question for you. Well, I hope it's a great question. It always makes people stop and think, which is normally the indication of a good question. What's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career?
I don't know, ignorance is bliss in a lot of ways. I think if I knew a lot of the stuff that I knew now, I might not be doing this because of the pain involved in getting here. But I think I'm going to steal this one from Tom Hanks, actually. I saw a round table with him and a bunch of actors where they were talking about like, hey, if you could tell your younger self, right? And it was this too shall pass. No matter how good things are, this too shall pass. No matter how bad things are, this too shall pass. I've gotten very wrapped around, certain scenarios, certain things, and thinking things were way more important than they actually were on the big picture side of the house. And I wish I had a bit of a bigger view. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I had the ignorance that I had early in my career because I just put my head down and I worked it, and I feel like I've earned a lot of what I've gotten right now. There's certain aspects of luck along the way, but I personally believe that you make your own luck. But it was just to be like, all right, I kind of got this advice early, which was don't let the highs get too high and don't let the lows get too low, because sales is one of those professions where if you let that happen, you will go absolutely crazy. But I think I stressed out too much about stuff I couldn't control. I'll leave you with this too. I actually, this translates to something my daughter and I deal with or work on every day. Back a few years here ago in the States, elections were happening, whatever, and my wife and I were very passionate about what was happening, right? Very aggravated with what was going on. And what I could tell, and this was around the time that my daughter was about 6 or 7 years old, same time we wrote the book, and I could tell she was getting angry, like she was getting mad, but for no reason, like she was just mirroring mommy and daddy. And I recognized why. And I was like, oh shit. And so I remember shutting off the TV and I said, sweetheart, we can't control what's up on that television. We can't. So we can't get mad at it. And mommy and daddy are doing a bad job showing you that, right? So we all have to reset. So we did a little brainstorm exercise and said, all right, well, what can we control? And we came down with this acronym EAT: effort, attitude, and how you treat people. You can control how hard you work, effort. You can control your attitude, whether it's positive or negative, and you can control how you treat other people. You can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you treat other people. And so every morning, my daughter and I have this nice little handshake that we do when we drop her off from school. Like, all right, what can we control today? EAT, effort, attitude, how you treat people. So I think if I had settled on that earlier, I would have reduced a lot of my stress about focusing on things I absolutely could not control. And I'd probably be even further along in my career today than I am.
John, it's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
If people don't know where to find you, what's the best way to make contact?
Yeah, I think the easiest is the website, right? So I'm revamping everything here in the next few months, but if you go to jbarrows.com, so the letter J, BARROWS.com, you'll see all my social channels. That's where I'd give away a ton of free content on YouTube and on Instagram. And then I do a podcast. So I got my Make It Happen Monday podcast where you can find on any one of the main ones. And we have cool conversations like this, all kind of sales, but business entrepreneurship. You know, we talk about mental health in some cases too. So yeah, I'm just trying to do what I can to get the word out there and try to combat a lot of the negative perceptions here. So, but it's not easy. I will tell you, if you're looking for the silver bullet, don't follow me, don't connect with me, because I don't give it. You got to put in the work. But if you're willing to put in the work, I'll give you everything I got. So,
well, that's great. That's great. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you to the listener as well. Please give us a review if you like what you hear. It just helps to boost the ratings and the listenership.